They moved like shadows, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. In the age of Japan's warlords, they were spies, assassins, and masters of deception. But behind the legend lies another truth, one built on skill, strategy, and survival. This is the story of the ninja, real warriors, hidden in myth. Welcome to the lost world of the ninja.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are slipping on the black clothes, scaling the castle walls, and disappearing into the mists of history to track one of the most compelling and misunderstood figures in military history, the ninja. A modern image is it's everywhere. Invincible, silent, superhuman action heroes who live in the shadows.
The shinobi, yes. Or the shadow warriors, as they were known in feudal Japan. And I think we have to start right out of the gate by acknowledging that the sheer scale of the global myth is completely, and I mean completely, disconnected from the historical reality.
Right. If you've watched a B-movie or played a video game, the ninja is the ultimate archetype. Stealth, martial superiority, all of that. But what is truly fascinating, and where we have to begin this deep dive, is the incredible contrast between that global obsession and their actual reputation in Japan.
It's a huge cultural paradox. It really is. In Japan, if you look at the historical record, it paints a surprisingly harsh picture. These were not romantic heroes.
Not at all. They were frequently viewed by the ruling classes, by the samurai, as little more than thieves, spies, and cold-blooded murderers. They were the total antithesis of the prevailing code of honor, the Bushido.
And that stigma, it's potent, isn't it? To think that this ultimate cultural export of martial prowess is, in many ways, a point of historical embarrassment in its own home.
It speaks volumes about the nature of their work. The samurai fought honorably, often in open combat, valuing the way you fight over just winning.
The process was everything.
Exactly. But the ninja, they valued survival and the successful outcome of the mission above all else. They were effective, astonishingly so. But they operated entirely outside the strict ethical and military code of the ruling class. Their methods were seen as treacherous, cowardly, even polluting to the ideals of warfare. Okay, let's unpack this and get to the truth. Our mission today is to travel 400 years back to the heart of chaos in Japan, strip away the mythology and uncover the real story, the historical role, the brutal training, and the incredible, almost cinematic story of one of their most famous masters, Tanba Momochi. To really understand where the ninja came from, we have to set the stage. We need to go back to the mid-16th century, specifically the 1560s. This was the era known in Japan as the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states. That phrase sounds dramatic, but what did it actually mean for, the average person living there at the time? It meant pure, relentless anarchy. The central military ruler, the shogun, he'd utterly lost control. For nearly 200 years, the entire Japanese archipelago was just consumed by bloody, continuous warfare.
So it wasn't one big war, but lots of smaller ones.
Exactly. You had these local warlords, known as daimyo, powerful feudal lords, and they commanded massive armies of samurai. They were all fighting in these shifting, temporary alliances for regional and eventually national supremacy.
And a goal. The driving ambition was singular: reunify Japan under a new shogun. Your own shogun, of course. So in that environment, this constant high-stakes conflict, I imagine a reliance on traditional samurai warfare, mounted charges, honorable duels, was probably becoming a bit inefficient. Victory must have demanded more than just bravery.
Absolutely. As the conflicts grew in scale and frequency, the warlords needed specialists who could give them an edge. They needed quick, decisive victories that didn't require moving huge armies or these long, drawn-out sieges. They needed a new type of military operative.
A mercenary. A mercenary unit, yes, capable of achieving victory off the battlefield. And that is the vacuum the ninja filled. Our sources are very, very clear on this. They were not superhuman. They were highly specialized units, arguably the most effective agents in East Asia in their particular field.
Okay, so if they weren't leading the charge on the battlefield, what was their core product? What were they actually being hired to do for these daimyo?
They were specialized professional mercenaries. They were hired for very specific, often highly destructive, contracted tasks. We can really distill their whole mission profile down to 3 primary essential services that guaranteed them work in this era of chaos.
All right, let's hear the big 3, the core tasks that define the ninja.
First, and maybe most important, was espionage. Gathering actionable intelligence, knowing enemy troop movements, supply locations, weaknesses in their forts, internal political drama. A good spy network could decide a campaign before the first sword was even drawn.
So information was the real weapon. It was everything. Second was infiltration and subversion. This is your sabotage, kidnapping, spreading disinformation, sowing chaos deep within enemy lines to just break their morale and command structure.
And number 3.
Arson, setting critical enemy facilities on fire, resource depots, food stores, or, most lethally, their gunpowder magazines. In that era, fire was the quickest, cheapest, and most devastating weapon you could possibly use.
And beyond those 3, they were also the go-to guys for high-level assassinations and even counterintelligence. Their mastery of disguise meant they could blend into pretty much any setting. I read they could operate for months undetected while wearing the enemy's uniform. They could. And here's a crucial point about the need for total secrecy. These were highly classified operations. The ninja signed strictly secret contracts, these shinobi shihai, so covert that sources say not even their immediate family might know their true mission or where they were.
This isolation was partly to protect their families, but it was also a necessity for maintaining operational security. You can't have leaks. Now, you had smaller groups practicing these arts, ninjutsu, all across Japan, but the real elite, the masters, they came primarily from one specific geographical area, the Iga province. Why there? What made Iga so special? Iga's location was its primary defense and its greatest source of strength. It was a remote region, tightly ringed by these really formidable mountains.
So natural fortifications.
Perfect natural fortifications. This isolation made it a refuge from the bigger conflicts that were ravaging the plains. It attracted war refugees, disgruntled lower-ranking samurai, and small, fiercely independent landowners. These were all people determined to maintain their own autonomy against these huge invading daimyo.
So they weren't under the thumb of a single ruling lord like most of Japan. They developed a kind of communal defense system.
Exactly. And this created a unique, highly localized social structure. Martial arts were just a way of life, practiced by most able-bodied men, and records suggest some women too, which was very unusual for the time. The rank-and-file fighters were typically farmers who would train after their fieldwork.
So not a full-time standing army.
Not for everyone.
Yeah.
But the elite fighters, the masters, like Tanba Momochi, they dedicated their entire lives to constant, rigorous training.
And their political organization was a true outlier for that chaotic time. I found this part fascinating.
It was almost democratic. While most of feudal Japan was ruled by the absolute authority of a single warlord, Iga was governed by a 12-member council of elders. This decentralized system prevented any one person from getting too powerful. It was all about collective decision-making.
And they had a pact, right?
A mutual defense pact, yes. The local clan leaders all signed it, guaranteeing immediate and full assistance if any part of Iga were attacked. This is what solidified them as this formidable, unified military entity.
It sounds like the perfect crucible for a specialized, defensive mercenary group. You've got the geographical isolation, this fierce desire for independence, and a society basically organized around constant martial readiness.
And they were strategically brilliant. The Iya clans, along with the neighboring Koka clans, they had this vital and continuous knowledge exchange. They were always sharing strategies, techniques, and, critically, intelligence from their spy networks. This preserved a deep well of strategic and survival wisdom that's largely been forgotten in modern times.
What really stands out to me is that core philosophical difference embedded in ninjutsu. It's so different from the samurai code. The philosophy is purely pragmatic. It's completely devoid of that restrictive code of honor that bound the samurai. It basically states, if you cannot defeat the enemy in open, conventional combat, you must use absolute strategy and deception. No rules.
No rules. Ninjutsu, therefore, utilizes every trick, every maneuver, every piece of misinformation, every act of sabotage to reach the goal. Victory trumped honor, which made them invaluable to their employers, but despicable to their opponents.
That transition from the romantic warrior to the pragmatic, almost amoral strategist brings us directly to the training regimen. And this was arguably the most intense in all of East Asia. We actually have a living link to this old tradition through the story of Master Junichi Kawakami. He reportedly began his ninjutsu training when he was just 6 years old. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the knowledge they needed wasn't primarily about physical fighting. No, Kawakami's account really confirms that ninjutsu wasn't just a martial art. It was a comprehensive, multidisciplinary military science rooted in deception. Think about the skill set of a high-ranking samurai. Court etiquette, writing, spearmanship, sword fighting. It's a demanding list, for sure. Yeah. But the ninja had to master all of those baseline skills and then add this astonishingly long list of specialized counter-conventional techniques on top of it.
Precisely. The requirements included mastery of undercover techniques, perfect disguise, advanced pyrotechnics and bomb making, deep psychology, counterintelligence, and critically, chemistry and pharmacology.
So they were military academics, engineers, and scientists who also happened to be elite killers.
That's a very good way to put it. And this vast esoteric knowledge was passed down orally, supplemented by these secret, highly cryptic, and often deliberately incomplete handbooks
Why incomplete?
to prevent their full knowledge base from falling into enemy hands. If a book was captured, it would be useless without the oral tradition to decode it.
Let's focus on that deception element. Tanba Momochi spent years mastering identity. In an age of heavily guarded borders, disguise wasn't a trick. It was survival.
Disguise was paramount. To pass through the territorial lines of warring daimyo in the 16th century was almost impossible for anyone without a legitimate reason, so Tanba trained extensively in acting, not just putting on a costume, but completely embodying another person. This required a deep psychological dive into the background of whatever role he was playing.
And the role of the wandering monk was the perfect cover, wasn't it?
It was ideal. Monks held a unique status in society. They were seen as apolitical, and they could travel seamlessly across borders without attracting too much military suspicion. But to perfect that identity, the ninja had to memorize regional accents, local slang,
The little detail.
the tiniest details. They had to acquire a highly specific knowledge of the area, the kind of trivial stuff only a native would possess, so that if they were questioned by a patrol or a local, the fake identity would hold up flawlessly under interrogation.
Yeah.
Their ability to switch dialects was a profound art form.
This level of focus also extended to simple logistics, which is what led to the development of the famous ninja power food.
Right, they needed compact, high-energy sustenance for these long, deep penetration missions where, foraging was impossible or just too risky. Each family or clan had its own secret recipe.
What was in it, typically?
Typically, it was a compressed paste mixed from rice, buckwheat, roasted tea leaves, and sometimes dried fish blood. This kept their pack weight minimal, provided sustained energy, and crucially, it kept them from needing to hunt or cook, because that would inevitably create detectable odor or smoke.
Speaking of odor, the diet wasn't just about energy, it was a core operational security measure. The ninja had to maintain a strict odor-free diet.
This is one of the most compelling biological elements of their training. It's incredible. They eat large amounts of vegetables, tofu, and nuts, but they avoided anything strong-smelling like red meats, onions, garlic, or excessive amounts of sugar or spices.
Okay, avoiding onions and garlic, that makes intuitive sense for stealth, but why was sugar restricted? What's the problem with sugar?
It's related to metabolic efficiency and pheromones. A high intake of sugar and certain fats leads to a more intense and distinctive body odor through your sweat and other metabolic byproducts. In the absolute darkness of a night infiltration, a highly trained samurai might not be able to see the ninja.
But they could smell them.
They could smell them. Their senses were honed by constant military life, and they were often acute enough to easily smell a person hiding nearby. Body odor, even slight perspiration tainted by certain foods, became a life-or-death operational vulnerability.
That just shifts the whole focus. It's not about the sword. It's about meticulous biological control. It also raises the question of where this vast esoteric knowledge even came from. How did these isolated mountain communities gather such deep scientific and psychological data?
The origins are debated by historians, but two main theories emerge. One suggests their knowledge base might have been imported from mainland Asia, specifically from fleeing Chinese secret societies who traveled east and eventually settled in the relative safety of Iga.
And the other theory is more local, involving the spiritual practitioners of the mountains.
Yes, the profound influence of the Yamabushi monks. These were ascetic mountain hermits, masters of endurance, medicine, and esoteric natural knowledge. They lived deep in the Iga Mountains and shared paths and wisdom with the ninja.
And these monks had a certain reputation, right?
Oh yes, because of their discipline and isolation, the Yamabushi were ascribed almost supernatural powers by common people. They could supposedly ride clouds, appear everywhere, and accomplish feats of endurance and healing that seemed completely impossible.
So the rigorous discipline, the spiritual foundation, and the natural wisdom of the Yamabushi, that became the fertile ground from which the pragmatic military ninja fighters evolved.
Yes, and this blend of spiritual discipline and practical knowledge is what allowed them to develop their specialized chemical expertise. We can really see the depth of this knowledge when we examine their methods for creating, well, some highly effective sedatives. This detail is genuinely chilling.
You're talking about the specific preparation for inducing unconsciousness, I am. The ninja were experts at improvisation, often creating effective chemical agents from foul, easily accessible materials. Our sources describe a specific soporific preparation, drying, grinding, and then burning worms found in human feces. Wow. I mean, the sheer desperation or dedication required to perfect that process is just hard to imagine.
Well, while it was certainly foul-smelling to prepare, the end product was apparently potent. It induced a deep state of unconsciousness, which was necessary for infiltration or, eliminating resistance without a struggle. They also mastered irritants and early forms of tear gas derived from natural sources. It just proves that ninjutsu wasn't a noble pursuit. It was a cold, multidisciplinary application of science, strictly geared toward mission success.
So moving from the mental science and chemistry, we have to look at the brutal physical and sensory conditioning the ninja went through. And this wasn't just about making them strong. It was designed to fundamentally alter their capacity for endurance, resistance, and absolute stealth.
That's right. Let's talk about the physical hardening. This was reported to be the most painful and relentless aspect of their training.
So they had to be exceptionally fit, obviously.
Exceptionally fit, but the training was hyper-specific to their tasks. It wasn't just about general strength. They needed to strengthen every structural part of their body. Their feet for silent movement and climbing. Their hands and fingers for gripping and endurance.
And even their heads, which sources say they conditioned to be hard as armor against impact.
Yes. This constant, agonizing physical process served multiple ends. It gave them the endurance to play the role of a frail old beggar for days on end, and it provided the raw physical strength needed to scale sheer walls and trees without any aid.
It sounds like total bodily dedication. But you mentioned there was one exception, one part of the body where hardening was strictly forbidden.
Yes, the palms of the hands were entirely taboo for these hardening exercises.
Yeah.
And this is a brilliant operational detail. In the absolute pitch black of a night infiltration, the sense of touch was a ninja's most vital tool.
Of course.
They relied on their sensitive palms to feel subtle differences in terrain, pressure plates, tripwires, or the texture of a wall they were climbing. They just could not afford to dull that sensory input with calluses or intense conditioning.
That makes so much sense. They intentionally maintained a single point of vulnerability for maximum sensory advantage. So after years of this physical brutality, the final psychological test was often not a test of strength, but of mastering what they called the sixth sense, the ability to anticipate an attack before it began.
And the ninja tradition asserts that this ability is not mystical. It's a completely learned, trainable skill based entirely on hyper-awareness and focused concentration. It's about tuning your brain's filter to process stimuli that you normally just ignore.
So, if this is trainable, what were the exercises? How did they achieve this heightened state of awareness? The first major exercise focused on auditory and environmental awareness, listening for the falling needle. Okay, that sounds impossible.
Well, the goal wasn't superhuman hearing. It was about intense concentration. The student would focus solely on the very faint sound of the needle being dropped on a surface, sharpening their entire sensory complex through extreme auditory attention. This exercise conditioned them to filter out all the noise and focus on the minutest environmental changes. A creaking floorboard, a shift in the wind.
And the second exercise for the more advanced students involved sight and stillness.
This was fixating on a candle flame. The student had to maintain focus on the single, steady flame for long periods. Over time, the goal was to push past the visual focus until the brain began to register the external sounds, the distant noises, the tiny sounds outside your immediate periphery that usually just fade into background white noise.
So it's not really about seeing the flame.
No, it's about using the flame as an anchor to open up your other senses. This discipline was key to developing that natural sixth sense of environmental awareness. Without this kind of control, your eyes would strain and tear, but mastery allowed for constant, non-fatiguing hypervigilance.
This rigorous physical and mental training was paired with highly specialized equipment. Let's talk about the tools they carried for close combat or escape. They were usually tiny and designed for maximum surprise.
Yes, they favored items that were compact, easily concealed, and could be utilized instantly. Our sources detail the use of tiny three-bladed knives. These weren't really designed for fighting, but for immediate close-quarters assassination or as a distraction to create an opening.
In the most alarming method, the use of small, razor-sharp needles that they could discreetly store in their mouth or sleeve.
Right, the idea being that they could use these even while they were restrained or sleeping.
How so?
These needles could be spat forcefully at an attacker's eyes or throat if they were ambushed while asleep or tied up. They were designed for desperate, shocking defense and assassination. It represents the ultimate commitment to survival over any idea of fair combat. So now we transition from the theory and the training to the central dramatic narrative of the ninjas' history, the moment they were forced to fight for their very existence. And this threat was embodied by the rise of the most ruthless and powerful warlord of the era, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga was a force of nature. He was rapidly conquering vast swaths of Japan, and he viewed the fiercely independent Iga province as an intolerable problem.
But why? Why was Iga, this small, isolated province, such an existential threat to a megalord like Nobunaga?
It was both political and logistical. Politically, Nobunaga just could not tolerate an independent, militarily competent republic existing within his sphere of influence. It set a bad precedent. Logistically, Iga sat right on critical supply and communication routes that he needed to control for his expansion. He had to subdue them.
So he sends his son.
He ordered his son, Nobukatsu, to build a large fortress nearby, establishing a forward operating base. And Nobukatsu, who was very eager to prove himself, saw this as his big opportunity for glory.
Tanba Momochi, as one of the chief leaders of the Iga, he recognized this fortress as an immediate danger. A direct attack would be suicide, so he needed supreme espionage to plan his assault. And this story exemplifies true ninjutsu. Tanba had to know the enemy's strength precisely. Disguised perfectly as a wandering monk, he used a low-tech, genius method for reconnaissance. He carried a pouch filled with a counted number of beans, a living, low-tech intelligence report. How did this work in practice? It's so clever.
It is. For every passing enemy soldier he observed, troops entering, guards changing shifts, supply wagons coming in, he would just drop a single bean from his pouch. He worked all day, remaining completely inconspicuous, observing the troop flow.
And at the end of the day,
By nightfall, he could count the beans remaining in the pouch and subtract that number from his starting total. This gave him the precise garrison strength, troop rotation schedules, and even supply levels. It was vital data for planning the infiltration.
with the intelligence secured, Tanba planned this complex, multi-stage infiltration and assault with his elite unit. Let's just dissect the anatomy of this silent attack. The enemy's first line of defense would be the listening posts, the lookouts.
The initial phase involved eliminating those perimeter guards. Tanba's team approached silently, always moving against the direction of the wind to avoid their scent being detected, and crucially, timing their footsteps to the precise rhythm of the enemy guard's patrol.
So they're literally walking in sync with the enemy.
Exactly. Once the guard was silently neutralized, the ninja used prearranged secret signals, often mimicking natural animal sounds or subtle environmental cues, to transmit the all-clear status back to the main unit. This ensured no alarm was raised by an overdue check-in from the guard post.
Okay, so lookouts are down. The next challenge was the illumination zone, the second defense ring.
This was a strip of carefully raked gravel designed to crunch underfoot and illuminated by constantly burning fires to expose anyone trying to cross. Stealth alone wouldn't work in this open area.
So a distraction.
A coordinated, significant distraction. They'd create a false alarm far from their entry point to momentarily draw the guard's attention and the illumination away, allowing the elite team to cross that exposed space completely undetected. And then the final obstacle before the walls, the water moat. Getting wet would mean leaving obvious, traceable footprints once you were inside, so they employed their engineering skills. For this crossing, they used an improvised bamboo raft floating atop small, sealed barrels. This ferried them and their equipment across the water without anyone getting soaked. The enemy, you see, often expected an assault from the main gate, but Tanba and his men silently scaled the highest, steepest, and least guarded walls.
Scaling walls in silence is one level of skill, but remaining undetected inside the fortress, moving through barracks and living quarters, that's a completely different challenge.
It required a mastery of subtle Japanese architectural details. One little-known defense against ninja was the traditional method of laying out the tatami mats, the woven straw floor coverings.
How could the floor mats be a trap?
Well, the woven straw mats were traditionally laid out in a very specific direction. If a ninja walked with the direction of the fiber grain, their movement was completely silent. But if their foot struck against the fiber grain, Even the slightest pressure would create this barely perceptible rustling noise.
Ah, and a trained guard would hear that.
A seasoned night watchman, even half asleep but still on high alert, could easily detect that sound. The ninja had to know the patterns instinctively and adjust their route on the fly.
The sources also note that after their initial diversion, Tanba's team didn't strike immediately. They hid and waited for several hours. That kind of runs counter to the movie version of a raid, you know?
That delay was pure psychological warfare and strategy. A diversion puts the enemy on maximum alert, which makes movement impossible. The wise ninja waited until the defending troops grew tired, cold, and complacent, assuming the crisis had passed. That moment of enemy weakness and exhaustion, that was the precise window of opportunity.
And the technique they used for extreme quiet when moving through the sleeping quarters is astonishing. The level of detail is almost unbelievable. To move through a hall full of sleeping soldiers without causing the slightest disturbance, they used a unique four-point stealth technique, walking low on their hands and feet to distribute their weight and avoid placing pressure on any sensitive, creaky floorboards. But the most extreme measure was managing their breath.
Yes, to prevent their exhaled breath, which carries warmth, humidity, and odor, from hitting a sleeping soldier's face and causing them to suddenly wake up, they held a folded piece of paper in their mouth.
To direct their breath sideways, that is just incredible biological and acoustic control.
It really shows that ninjutsu was a science of survival. The climax, of course, was eliminating the high-value target. Tando successfully killed the commander, signaled the coordinated attack, and most critically, set the central gunpowder storage facility on fire. The fortress was utterly destroyed, and Nobukatsu, the son of the most feared man in Japan, was humiliated by a handful of lawless warriors.
This defeat was a profound embarrassment to the Oda clan. Nobukatsu, consumed by vengeance, returns the following year. He gathers a massive new army, 8,000 men without his father's knowledge, and marches straight back into Iga.
The ninja were still vastly outnumbered, but their greatest strength was their superior knowledge of the terrain. The dense Iga forests, the ravines, the mountain passes. They employed absolute guerrilla warfare, luring the invading force deep into a landscape that was designed to be a military nightmare.
They used every dirty trick, as the sources say, to turn the jungle against the samurai. Let's detail some of those specific weapons and traps.
They specialized in anti-pursuit and area denial weapons. A prime example is the caltrops, or crow's feet. These were small, razor-sharp, shuriken-like metal spikes, engineered so that no matter how you threw them, one point was always facing directly upward. Yeah. The ninja would throw these behind them as they fled, maiming the feet of their heavily armored pursuers and crippling the chase. They were also masters of early explosives, using small shell bombs, gunpowder, and shrapnel sealed within paper or ceramic bowls, designed to create maximum fragmentation and terror.
And their psychological warfare techniques were simple but brilliantly effective.
Yes. The samurai retreated in a panic after seeing strange mountain lights that suggested a vast, coordinated ninja army was surrounding them in the night. In reality, these were just torches fastened to trees and possibly carried by small groups of runners, mimicking a massive, overwhelming force.
And it worked.
The tactic worked perfectly. Nobukatsu lost one of his most capable generals and suffered a complete rout, bringing further unforgivable shame upon the Oda clan for a second time.
Twice defeated by an army of independent mercenaries. This was the line Oda Nobunaga could not tolerate crossing. The persistent threat to his communication routes and the direct humiliation of his family, it demanded total retribution. In 1581, Nobunaga planned what would become the Great Defeat. This was not a punitive expedition. This was an operation of total eradication. He left nothing to chance. He marshaled all his available forces to attack the small province simultaneously from 6 different sides. The scale of the assault was just monumental. 55,000 soldiers against approximately 10,000 Iga fighters. And that includes professional ninja, foot soldiers, and armed villagers. This time, though, the Iga's famous guerrilla tactics were neutralized before the fighting even began.
Betrayal. A ninja from the neighboring Koka province, historically their allies, defected to Nobunaga's forces, and this traitor shared everything. The Iga's meticulous defense plans, their strongholds, the precise placement of their traps. This single act of treachery allowed the massive Oda army to completely avoid the dense forests and strongholds where the ninja had planned to deploy their guerrilla tactics.
With their strategic advantage gone, Tanba and his remaining forces were forced into fortified combat. Describe the ingenuity of those ninja strongholds.
They were masterpieces of defensive architecture. On the outside, they look like simple farming estates, but they are actually complex defensive systems designed for evasion and ambush. Rice fields were engineered with hidden trenches and systems so they could be flooded instantly, creating barriers and minefields against approaching infantry.
And inside the building.
Inside, there were secret compartments in the floor for quick weapon caches, revolving doors for rapid escape, and countless hidden places for ambush.
What did the arsenal inside these hidden caches contain?
The caches housed a terrifying mix of conventional and chemical weaponry, really demonstrating their proficiency in pyrotechnics. They had fire rockets, early hand grenades, and even nerve gas derived from natural poisons. They also improvised lethal weapons from common household items, like heavy iron cooking rings, which were modified with inner and outer blades for slashing. Even a harmless-looking bamboo tube could conceal a spring-loaded chain, a small sword, or hidden caltrops.
Despite all that ingenuity and the intense resistance, the numbers were just too overwhelming. With the defense plans compromised, the strongholds fell one by one, and the final decision fell to Tanba Momochi.
Tanba chose to make a final stand. He defended his last bastion with his core unit of 450 ninja, alongside 1,200 foot soldiers, women, and children, while being surrounded by over 30,000 of Oda's soldiers. Our sources suggest that, strictly by the code of ninjutsu, this was a strategic error.
How so?
When the enemy is overwhelmingly superior and the mission is compromised, a ninja's duty is to preserve the knowledge and flee, not engage in a futile stand of honor. They should have scattered.
Yet they held out. The siege lasted over 2 weeks.
The Iga resistance was fierce. They used every weapon in their arsenal: firearms, bombs, desperate night attacks. But attrition was inevitable. In a final desperate maneuver, Tanba attempted to rally his men by engaging in an incredibly risky open attack, and he actually managed to kill one of Oda's leading generals. This bought them a few more days, but it couldn't change the tide. Iga fell on November 24, 1581, and Nobunaga was true to his word. He was interested only in total annihilation. The aftermath was one of the darkest moments in Japanese history. Sources claim the rivers and forests of Iga ran red with blood. The few who survived either fled immediately to neighboring provinces or were rounded up, lost all their land and income, and were eventually forced to fight as expendable soldiers in Nobunaga's army. The tradition, as a centralized independent power, was shattered forever.
But the fate of the ninja masters remains the ultimate act of deception.
Indeed. The bodies of the two greatest ninja leaders, including Tanba Momochi, were famously never recovered. And this fact immediately gave rise to the enduring legend that they used their ultimate mastery of evasion to escape the destruction. Did they perish in the flames, as Nobunaga wanted the world to believe? Or did they employ their final, greatest trick?
What do the legends suggest about their ultimate escape?
The legend asserts they deliberately set their own homes on fire to mask their disappearance through newly discovered secret tunnels hidden beneath the ruins. Furthermore, the legend points out that high-ranking ninja masters often maintain multiple public identities, sometimes complete with separate households and families in other areas. This allowed them to truly vanish into the general population, never to be seen as Tanba Momochi again. If he escaped, his primary mission would have been to ensure the secret teachings of ninjutsu were passed down to a gifted student, securing the legacy, even if he himself disappeared forever into the shadows he loved.
So what does this all mean? We started with this mythical shadow warrior of film and fiction, but the reality we've uncovered is, well, a pragmatic, multidisciplinary intelligence agent and elite mercenary who fought with unparalleled ingenuity for his people's independence.
It means the historical verdict is profoundly complex. Were they simply cold-blooded killers and thieves, as their Japanese reputation suggests? Or were they elite, dedicated soldiers who paid the ultimate price for clinging to their independence in a world governed by brutal feudal power?
They operated entirely outside the recognized system of honor.
They were precise, cold, and utterly ruthless in their actions, certainly. But they also adhered to their own strict code. They never betrayed the lords they served while under contract, and they fought with incredible determination until the bitter end in 1581. They made a living through deception and violence, but they did the job they were hired for with unmatched proficiency, often against staggering odds.
And that commitment to survival and disappearance brings us back to the core philosophy of ninjutsu. There's a famous ninja saying that summarizes their entire philosophy perfectly. The best ninja has no odor, leaves no name, and everyone wonders if he ever existed. So, if a true ninja master's ultimate goal was to remain utterly hidden in the mists of the past, to become an unproven ghost in the historical record, should we even stop trying to uncover the truth of Tanba Momochi? Or does the very mystery surrounding his unconfirmed fate just prove his ultimate, unmatched mastery of deception, enduring as the shadow warrior he always intended to be? Something for you to ponder until the next deep dive.